Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to have you here with us in London. Thanks so much for taking the time. Huge congratulations on the film. For people who haven't had a chance to see it yet, what can you tell them that they can expect going in?
This film is a film that might challenge an audience. So those who are interested in interaction or also in a film that makes them sort of think about it, talk about it, discuss about it, then I guess this is the right film to go to. The film is basically talking about a group of young students who fall for a radical idea. And then the film is watching and observing the surroundings and the society in which this was possible to happen.
And what gave you the original idea for, I guess, dealing with this subject matter, but the very specific setting and story that you tell around it?
I remember the first idea for this film, I think it came from a very personal moment, probably from my own fear as a parent that teenage son might be influenced in a way that I couldn't prevent or that I would be blind to, I maybe would just not notice. And I was thinking more about the vulnerability of young people, but then in the context also about how we as a society very much being manipulated all the time. So there are very many concepts that we fall for or ideas that we adapt. The topic became bigger going from there. And now I think the film is really trying to investigate a little bit the influences on our minds in our society.
Yeah, and I guess you can kind of look at the film and sort of on different levels, you know, more specifically about eating disorders. And I know there's been a few films that have kind of tried to tackle that, but not many. I was thinking of A Banquet and kind of like psychological horror, Sebastian Lenia's The Wonder. That's not really been dealt with in many films. Or you can look at it more in a sort of more generalized sense about being seduced into sort of simple solutions to the chaos of the world around us. So was the concept of the eating disorder also a really key theme for you?
No, the topic of the eating disorder is only, I would say, at the side of this film, because it is more about how a cult is being formed and how the group of students are falling for a certain ideology around food. In the beginning, this food nutrition ideas are still very good and very understandable, but they become more and more radical until they become also destructive.
And the thing that's also incredibly striking about the film is its tone, this kind of deadpan, satirical, kind of dark comedy, but also the aesthetic, which is very stylized. Can you talk about how you came up with that? Were you taking reference from other films or filmmakers? And why was this the best way for you to tell your story?
For me, I would say in all my films, there is a slightly distanced perspective. My films are not talking about individuals, or they're not so much making an individual psychologically understandable, because I don't really believe in that concept. My films are told from a more distanced perspective, and by doing that, I portray certain mechanisms of our society. The moment where we're all a little bit the same. And I think this is a little bit like looking into the mirror for many of us. So the weird humor in the film comes also from that awkward moment that we might see ourselves in a mirror also as absurd or slightly ridiculous, or we think we know it all and then we don't at all in the end. So I think what I'm trying to walk is a thin red line, that invites us more to reflect about also our weaknesses and defaults, and not so much taking sides and saying this is right and this is wrong.
And how did you, I guess, craft each of the individual characters who all kind of come from these slightly different settings, slightly different families, the pressures that they're each under are different, the relationships they have with their parents, and what did you want to do by representing all those different characters in the story?
Well, I think I tried to show a sort of kaleidoscope of different versions, but what the film, the setting of the film is definitely in one of our countries, which means in a rich, developed, industrialized country of the Western world. So this is basically the setting. So the film does not take place in France or the UK or Austria, but it takes place in a rich world, and it, I think, deals also with the problem that we, living in the rich countries, we have that fear now that we caused climate change. How do we stop it? And I think there is also a fear of we might lose our wealth because it's basically unfair. So I think in the background of that film there are certain question marks and threats also that are being shown.
And such a wonderful cast that you've put together, but particularly Mia Wasikowska right at the centre of it. How did you go about choosing who's going to be in your film, and particularly working with Mia?
I followed Mia Wasikowska's career for quite a while, and I was always fascinated by the contradiction in her personality. I think she has a very girlish and harmless appearance in the first place, but I've seen her in roles where there is a very dark side to her as well. And I find that very interesting with an actress. And working on the role of Miss Novak, and I think it was an interesting approach that we decided that Miss Novak, who is actually a cult leader, if you want, is not aware of the fact that she might harm the kids. She really believes that she's doing good. And this is it's a crazy position, if you want, also for an actress to perform. That was an interesting preparation also for the film.
And in the making of it, did you have some favourite scenes to shoot, most challenging moments? I mean, I love the sort of tete-a-tete, the sort of builds between her and the head teacher. Some of those scenes are brilliant. But for you, from your perspective, what were some of the best scenes or hardest scenes to shoot?
Well, I enjoyed very much the meeting of the parents towards the end of the film. All the parents meet to decide how they could rescue their kids from not eating. And one of the parents, the mother of Ben, she is the only person whose son has a scholarship and she doesn't earn very much money. And she's the only person who actually says the truth. And the other parents try to convince her that she's wrong or they don't believe her. And for me, this is a very important scene because it shows also the absurdity of the whole situation, but it also shows that sometimes we all are blind towards things that should be obvious. Sometimes we don't see what is actually going on.
And in terms of what people can take away from watching the film, I guess, is it sort of could be like a warning, or, you know, the fact that it's representing what can happen when we do sort of lose that connection with our children. And sometimes being too heavy-handed can actually make the situation worse, push them even further away. If we think of things like social media, we don't even know who they're being influenced by. And perhaps people are often looking for simple answers to complex questions about whether that's about climate change or, you know, how kind of the consumption that's rife in our society. And there isn't a simple answer to those things. So what do you think some of those questions are that are raised by the film?
I think it is that part of what you just said, there is no simple answer. I think if anything you can take from my film, then this is it, to understand that we are in the middle of contradictory truths. And sometimes we think we are right and maybe we're not. There is a human condition within all of us, which is exactly that there is a part of being ridiculous, also sometimes being wrong. That is part of our human nature. And I think it is important to not forget that and to not sort of think there is one solution, there is one answer, this is right and this is wrong. So I think my film tries to also have that humorous or slightly ironic look on ourselves to realize that we can fail.
See, the film's been all different film festivals, had an incredible reception, now landing here in the UK. How have you found the response to the film? What has that meant to you? And how excited are you to be showing it to a British audience tonight?
I'm very happy that the film is shown in the British cinemas now. And I've had a very interesting voyage with the film. So it premiered last year in 2023 at Cannes, and then I traveled quite a bit with the film, and I had different reactions. I always enjoy very much to talk with the audience about my film. The reactions are very often very contradictory on my films because they leave quite a lot of room for interpretation. So it was an interesting experience.
And obviously this has been your second English language film. Do you find it different or, exciting to shoot in English? Is that something you're going to do again next, or what else might you be doing with future projects?
So I'm already preparing a new film, and I will shoot again in English language, but not in the UK. I think this time the film will be mainly shot in a studio. Probably in Austria or Hungary or Germany or wherever. It's since my films never play in a specific country, but let's say in the Western world, it is possible to shoot this in the studio. But I like to shoot in the English language. It sort of also helps me a little bit to distance from my own script, going through that language which is not my mother tongue. So I like to do that.
And how do you see the health of the cinema industry right now? How do you see the landscape, whether that's from the point of view as a female filmmaker, whether you shoot in your mother tongue or in English? Do you feel like there's a lot of opportunities out there, or there's still some hurdles in place to be able to make the films you want to make?
Both. Well, maybe one thing I could say to your question is that I think as a female filmmaker, things have improved a little bit. I think there could be more. I remember that I was at a conference in Cannes, maybe 2016 or 17, and the conference was called 50-50 by 2020. So the aim was to have 50% female directors, at least in the Cannes competition in the year 2020. Then there was COVID. 2020, so I have had the feeling that was a sign of fate. There is no year 2020 at Cannes, and they wouldn't have had 50-50. And it's not even reached yet, although I think it would be very easy because there are very many very good films made by female filmmakers.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with me. Huge congratulations on Club Zero, and really enjoyed presenting it here tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.